This was the first real war that the Americans the Adventists had to face, and we came out of that war with an unofficial stand as a non-combatant church. And by that time, the Americans had made, the U.S. government had made provision for non-combatant service. If you belonged to a church that was opposed to the bearing of arms, you could work in a hospital or as a non-combatant in some other way. And that took care of the killing problem, that took care of the Sabbath problem, because helping people get well on the Sabbath is great. That's what Jesus did. He came to save life. And this is the basic, this is the basic motivation, that Jesus came to save life, and his followers shouldn't take life. I held a lecture down in one of the Mennonite universities some years ago. It was a national convention for peace churches. And I presented the historical view of the Adventists, and that is that we did not bear arms because, historically, this is the argument, we did not want to break the Sabbath, and we did not want to murder people. It was interesting, because the response to my paper was, as you Adventists are interesting people, you're the only one that bases the argument on the Ten Commandments. Everybody else bases it on the Sermon on the Mount. You should love your enemy. And you should do unto others as you'd want them to do unto you, which is a much stronger argument from my perspective. The other one fits into it. But sometimes we don't, because of our historical perspective, sometimes we fail to realize that there's probably not only other arguments, but prior arguments that are even better. And since that time, I've taught it a little differently. Certainly, I want to be like Jesus. I want to save lives, not destroy lives. That doesn't mean I shouldn't support Caesar. Render to Caesar those things which are Caesar's. But we come into conflict, Acts 5:39. We ought to obey God rather than men. And so we've got this tension. It's always there, and between the fact that we're citizens of two kingdoms. We're citizens of the kingdom of heaven, primarily, citizens of an earthly land, which God tells us we must render to Caesar, obey the government, because even a bad government is better than no government at all. I'm not into that because that's not my topic today, but it's true. Well, I couldn't get into it because I'll just give a quick illustration. The book of Judges. Oh. The key book of the book, the key story, the key passage of the book of Judges is, in those days there was no king in Israel, and every man did that which is right in his own sight. So what do? You got people out there, chopping up their wives instead of the 12 tribes. All these guys trying to gang rape his wife, and they abuse her, and she comes up and dies. And I mean, Judges is just read 19 to 21, and it's framed with that saying. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Hey, even a bad king is better than no king at all, when everybody's just doing to whoever, whatever, whenever they feel like it. Ay, ay, ay. So that's how come the New Testament takes the position that government is ordained of God. So we're stuck in this tension. And our young people, we'll come to the current in a bit, but our young people need help. Our church needs help on recapturing the vision that we used to have of being like Christ, even in our military service. But the Adventist Church in the Civil War was against volunteering, because when you volunteered, you gave up rights. Mm-hmm. And so this becomes you have a lever. Hey, you want me to serve, I'm willing to serve, but I don't want to take life. I want to help save life. And that, of course, made the Sabbath issue a non-issue. Okay, go ahead.
How many others besides Seventh-day Adventists were against?
Well, I give when I used to teach a course, The History of Religious Liberty, we talk about this, because certainly you got your Mennonites and you've got others. But see, some of them are what they call, now we'll get to this in a minute, total objectors. They won't go in the service. Jehovah's Witnesses will not go in the service at all.
Yeah.
Which means in Nazi Germany they were imprisoned along with the Jews. But Adventists never got imprisoned in Nazi Germany because Hitler was a vegetarian. The Nazi experience for the German church was not a happy one because he didn't drink, didn't smoke, and was a vegetarian. He must be a good guy. But the Jehovah's Witnesses, they paid dearly because they wouldn't go in. And so what do? At least in the States, they're put on farms and they grow vegetables for the troops. So I tell my Jehovah's Witness friends, well, what difference does it make if I'm healing their bodies or growing vegetables for them? You're still aiding the war effort. But hey, we're going to come to this and how Adventism handles these three options. No military service. Now, we'll come to it. Now, what was your question again?
How many others?
Oh, quite a few. And the problem is not with, at least in the United States, not with historic peace churches, such as the Mennonites and now the Adventists, and many others, but with those Methodists and Baptists and others who don't belong to a peace church but have personal convictions.
Oh.
Because in World War I, the ruling was if you belong to a historic peace church, you can be drafted as a non-combatant. But if it's a personal conviction, you can't be. In World War II, if it was a personal conviction, you could be. Now, after Vietnam, you didn't even have to be religious if you had a philosophical conviction. But those kind of people were just thrown into jail in World War II. You had to have a religious conviction. The area has broadened over time, which raises its own issues, because in a time of major crisis and they need everybody they can get, nobody will have freedom. That's just the way it is. I mean, if everybody says, I'm not going to bear arms, what do you do? Of course, if everybody on both sides did, that would be wonderful, because then nobody would bear arms. That's what my dad used to say after I stopped carrying a weapon. He said, well, what about everybody? Well, I said, number one, most people don't care about this issue. Number two, if everybody cared about it, it'd be a wonderful world. That's what heaven's going to be like. There'll be no combatants in heaven. But we live on earth, and people are going to have to make choices. But we're going to come to the current position of the Adventist Church fairly quickly here. So we looked at the Civil War period. We came out of that as non-combatants. The federal government had made provision for non-combatancy, and we were now established as a peace church. But we didn't have an official position voted. So J.N. Andrews was assigned after the Civil War to make this study, as we recall yesterday, and we found out from people that, hey, all Adventists weren't agreed on how to do this. I mean, George I. Butler comes up and says, look at the Old Testament. Yeah, I mean, God had soldiers. And he even had soldiers in the New Testament, centurions and stuff like that, who were obviously faithful people. And so, actually, Andrews never finished writing the paper. Nobody's ever used the evidence, but I find it a few years later he writes in the review reports that he didn't do it because he said the topic was much more complex than he thought it was. And so we sail through the rest of the 19th century with basically almost nothing to do with the military. There was no major wars. Oh, of course, you've got to go out and kill a few Indians now and then. Kill a few people on the Mexican border. And, you got these border warfare is much more constant in the United States than we think it is. We don't hear about it, But you got all these things, but nothing really big. Spanish-American War against Spain lasted, 100 days. That wasn't much to worry about. And then comes World War I. Not so bad for America, because America had a peace tradition. Not so bad in the United Kingdom. We had several of our men had to be in jail during the war because of their non-combatant convictions. They went to jail. But by and large, not much problem in the UK, but in Germany, and as we noted, and this is where we stopped, that the German church got caught unawares. The leadership, top leadership, went out of the country, and because of the pressures, they said, we will bear arms and fight on Sabbath. And this split the church. So now that's where we are. And then we began to take a look at some Ellen White statements, which we fairly well exhausted. And I'm going to read one last one. We were reading Ellen White statements in relationship to World War I, where Ellen White really didn't have much of an opinion. Now I'm going to go back to 1862, August. Remember what happened on August 1862, August 12? James White published the controversial article, The Nation, which basically said, we agonists are supportive of America, but we will not join the service because we're not volunteer, because we're not going to break the Sabbath, we'll kill people, break that commandment. And then James says, but if the government drafts us, then it's not voluntary. Then it's the government's fault if we break the Sabbath. And that broke loose a whole raft of argumentation. This is Ellen White on that article. The piece my husband wrote in the review, which expresses my mind. In other words, she's saying I'm in harmony with what my husband wrote. Although I am not fully settled in regard to taking up arms. But this looks consistent to me. I think it would please the enemy for us to obstinately refuse to obey the law of our country when this law is not against our religious faith and sacrifice our lives. It looks to me that Satan would exult to see us shot down so cheaply, and for our influence could not have a solitary influence upon beholders. No, all would think we're served just right, because we would not come to the help of our imperiled country. Were our religious faith at stake, we should cheerfully lay down our lives and suffer for Christ. That's quite a statement. She's agreeing basically with her husband that the Daniel 3, the Hebrew worthies thing, doesn't fit. Whatever you can make out of that, that's Ellen White's contemporary perspective during the Civil War. And it's a much more relaxed perspective than most of us would have expected. Ellen White is much more moderate in almost everything when you put her in her historical context, much more moderate than we would have expected. She seems to see things clearly, but she's not a hard line, this is the only way you can do things. She never took that approach. It seems to be our human nature that we have the right way and every other way is wrong. And we like to enforce that as doctrine. What I find remarkable about Ellen White, lifestyle issue after lifestyle issue, as I study these things in depth and in context, I don't find that kind of a woman out there. I don't find any one kind of diet. I don't find her with James over there jumping. Pork eating is wonderful. You know, the Bible's all for it. It's a sin. 22 years later, she's just sailing right through the middle. No, it's not a test. It's just not good for your health. You know. I don't find that woman that the church is creating. I find someone who's quite sensible, who has very high ideals and wants to live up to those ideals, but not every daddy's going to have to march to her throne. I've got a quotation, I didn't bring it with me today, on her and her husband. She says, James, they're having a big argument. one of their kids. She said, in fact, they can't even live together. The arguments got so bad. She says, James, I'm not trying to make you be like me. You be yourself, I'll be myself. My job, she says, I'm not perfect. My job is not to make you be like me. And that's what she said yesterday in that one letter, the testimony I read in 1889. It was on the back of the ministry cover. Hey, listen, I do at my table. If you want to do something else, that's fine. There's no rule will fit everybody for health. This is the kind of a woman we're dealing with. And I go into some Adventist churches, man, and they got the red books lined up, and they got the people lined up right after them. Boom, 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 boom. And what are they doing? They're taking the strongest statements and pushing them upon everybody. If you can't take anything else from this class, maybe that's something worth taking. That the woman is moderate. And she knows what she's talking about. She knows where the ideal is. She knows where the people are. She says aim for the ideal. But everybody's different. There's not one rule for everybody. So she takes the position that most Adventists wouldn't expect her to take on a whole lot of topics. You don't have to shoot the hogs. That's what you get in business. Don't bankrupt yourself just to be orthodox. I don't know why it says this stuff. This kind of stuff would get me hung. I have my own convictions on some of these things. But like I told the guy out in the Caribbean who was selling shells and is a diver for a living, you got to make your choice whether you're going to sell this, what's inside the shell to people to eat. I can't decide that for you. You got a brain. You got eyes. You got the Bible. You make your decision. I'm not going to be the Pope. You're the one that's going to live with God and yourself and your situation. Now, I think there are some things worse than others, okay? Those are optional issues. If you have somebody in your church that's abusing children, you better report them right away. There are no options. Mm-hmm. This is not true when I started the ministry. And as a result, there was a lot of tragedies that continued on because you tried to work with these people. If a child is being abused, that's not an option. I don't think morally or legally. I don't think it ever was morally. But, we always want to rescue these people, but what about the poor kid in the meantime? So there are situations that are so damaging that we have no choice. Okay, back now to what, Let's go now to the events after World War I. Because in World War I, the unity of the church was shattered between the official church led by Conradi and the Reformed Adventists. And that's basically where the Reformed Adventists in Europe got their power. Mm-hmm. That the church really, the official church really had made a serious mistake. They had said publicly and decided for the church, and let individuals decide. They took the responsibility on themselves to say, we will be combatants and fight on Sabbath. And if you have trouble with any of our people, let us know. That's an official statement. It split the church. After the war, in 1920, a meeting was held in Friedensau. That's our major institution then in Eastern Europe. It's our major, that is Eastern Germany. It's our major institution now. They held the meeting in Friedensau to reconcile the two opposing sides, but they got nowhere. Another attempt at reconciliation was made late in 1922 and early 1923 in Gland, Switzerland. And for the first time in Europe, the Church adopted a Declaration of Principles of Non-Combatancy. I read from the Review and Herald of March 6, 1924. Our European Brethren and Non-Combatancy. Written by W.A. Spicer, President of the General Conference. Switzerland. Following the comparative stabilizing affairs in Europe, they adopted a Declaration of Principles on Non-Combatancy. It is the first declaration of these principles ever made in our general work in Europe. And here's the Declaration of Principles. The Executive Committee of the European Division of the denomination of Seventh-day Adventists assembled in conference at Gland, Switzerland, having carefully counseled concerning Sabbath keeping, military service, bearing of arms in times of peace and during periods of war, unanimously declare themselves in harmony with the general teaching of their brethren of that denomination throughout the world as follows. We recognize earthly governments as ordained of God for the purpose of securing to their people the blessings of order, justice, and tranquility. That in the exercise of their legitimate functions, such governments should receive the loyal support of their citizens. There's Romans 13. We assert the justice of rendering tribute, custom, and honor to earthly governments as enjoined in the New Testament. We revere the law of God contained in the Decalogue, as explained in the teachings of Christ and exemplified in his life. For that reason, we observe the seventh-day Sabbath, Saturday, as sacred time. We refrain from secular labor upon that day, but engage gladly in works of necessity and mercy for the relief of suffering and the uplift of humanity. In peace and in war, we decline to participate in acts of violence and bloodshed. That's the position. And then it goes on, we grant to each of our church members absolute liberty to serve their country at all times and in all places in accord with the dictates of their personal conscientious convictions. So here we have a two-level approach. Number one, this is the position of the church. We decline to get involved in bloodshed and war. But we want to serve our country. But individuals must follow their own conscience. So two-level, the position of the church and the right of individuals. In addition to this statement, a special statement was made by the representatives of the German unions as follows, and I quote that statement. At the Council of the European Division Committee in Gland, Switzerland, and they give the dates, our position during the war, as it had been expressed in different documents, we read those documents, was reviewed, and we herewith, by our own signatures, confirm anew what had already been declared at Friedensau in 1920, our regret that such documents had ever been issued. So now we have a public apology by Conradi, Reinhaus, Schubert, and Schubert, the leaders of the German church during World War I, apologizing for what they had done. And now the church, in both of that time, its major fields, Europe and North America, were in harmony. That we were a non-combatant church, and bloodshed and violence was not the Christian way to go. So, but, just because the good brothers finally confessed that they were wrong in what they'd done in World War I in Germany did not solve the problem with the Reformed. This was their cause, and if they made peace, they'd have no reason to exist. I mean, that's basically it. This was their main complaint, but after the apologies were offered and a change was made, there was no reconciliation. So the difference goes on and on and on.
They expected that Conradi and Schubert to resign.
Oh, they wanted them to resign, yeah.
And they never did.
Yeah.
So This
Yeah.
was another tension. I studied it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think Peter should resign too, you know. After cursing the Lord. You know. But on the other hand, I understand these guys are hard-boiled politicians, denominational politicians. And I can understand that if you're not on the inside of the hard-boiled denominational politicians, so then what you have is sub-group hard-boiled denominational politicians called the Reformed dealing with the real people in power. Yeah. I can see their point, but if you take biblical parallels, yeah, that makes sense. But anyway, there was no healing. That's the history. That's the history.
Even until now, though.
Oh, not until now. And in fact, from time to time, I used to get Reformed Adventist pastors in my class at Andrews, but they were always converts. Because I don't know if you get the Reformed.
Oh, they have their own.
Oh, they
conference?
have. They got their own general conference.
Yeah.
And for years, I used to get their magazines and their Sabbath School quarterlies. And they only quote one author.
What?
Ellen White. That's it. That's the only author. I looked at their documents for probably 15 years. They only quote Ellen White. That's it. And there's no concept of what she's talking about. In fact, one time, what was the topic? It was so good, I think I put it in one of my books. Ellen White had said something. Oh, I wish I could remember. Hold on, guys. Anyway, Ellen White had said, I can't remember what it was, I'll just use a generality, to show their mentality. She said, this is not an issue. I wish I could remember what it was, because it's such a fascinating topic. This is not an issue. She went out of her way to say, she said, brethren, don't fight about this. This is not an issue. And they found, through the computer, 29 places where she said, this is not an issue. This is not an issue. This is not an issue. And they quoted all of them. The last section. But now we're in the end times. It's an issue. I mean, how can you win? I mean, how can you win? And they had gone by and they had picked all these things out with the computer. They had every last one of them, which is, oh no, this is not a test. It was a test. There's the word test. This is not a 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 test. And 29 times she said the same thing. And they come along. Now we're in the end times. It's an issue. That was from her tongue. How can you win?
Would the principle now of time and place and location can also be used by them now in that argument? We are now in the time of the end.
Oh, they can, you want to do that, you can do it with anything.
But that's only in Germany, though. We don't have it here in America. Some followers.
Oh yeah, no, we have
here
it.
also.
Oh, we have it here.
No, there's a the Reformed General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists throughout the world. About every third issue, they have their meetings down in Brazil and Peru and Mexico and Africa and Europe, and they got all their representatives there from the various. No, they're a worldwide movement.
And the same belief system. It's only the non-combatancy.
Yeah, I just don't see that emphasized quite so much because they got other things. But they do. They're very strict, very Ellen White, very no contextual, and their lifestyle issues are fairly tough. I remember one time I was in Germany, and they served us some food. I love to eat, but I like to salivate. Okay? It's easier to swallow if you've got saliva. They called this stuff food. It was some kind of, I don't know what it was. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't liquid. It was gunk. And I had this great big bowl of it. That was my meal, and I'm trying to figure out what am I going to do to get this stuff down. And I made a comment on the way out and said, "Oh, those are Reformed ladies that cooked that for you." Anyway, they were good health reformers. Much better than I was going to be. I always thought that food should taste good and be attractive. Not this bowl of whatever it was. Sludge. It was probably some kind of wheat boiled up, and maybe some split peas or something thrown in, and a bunch of other stuff. It was probably good for you. It probably didn't have any more salt than absolutely necessary, and which was almost nothing. And it certainly didn't have any nasty things like oil or anything else. It was just there. It just existed. And here I was existing, and I was trying to get the two to match up, and I just... But you will find out in some parts of the world, though. That wasn't true in Germany where I was, but in some parts of the world they have delicacies that will freak you out. And if you are the guest of honor,
you have to be the
watch
first.
out. I remember once I was up in Latvia preaching, and I got invited over to somebody's house. Now, Latvia is a European nation, but you have no idea how poor some nations can be. This guy had been the conference president for years, and I went to his house, and it was they had two well-grown daughters, very nice ladies. The house family was very poor, so there was 5 of us around the table, but they only owned 3 glasses. It's poorer than what I saw, much poorer than what I saw in Romania. And this has been I came to the conclusion, traveling in Eastern Europe, it was better to belong to one of the satellite nations than it was to belong to the Soviet Union.
Oh, yes, yes.
In fact, when I went to East Germany the first time, it was still East Germany. And I said, man, the toilet paper around here is like sandpaper. You know? and the division president at that time had to say that the softer the economy, the harder the toilet paper. And the guy said to me when I made the comment, he said, well, if you think it's bad here, try Poland. And in fact, if you want to really find it bad, go to the Soviet Union. They don't have it. So I came to the conclusion that being part of the Soviet Union was worse than being a satellite nation. As bad as it was. Because, I mean, I saw stuff in Romania. I saw some of the rolling stock, the freight cars that came right out of 1939. I mean, they were before the bombing. It looked like most of them had been bombed. And they were still using those things. But anyway, I was in Latvia, and they had 3 glasses. The father got a glass. I was the guest. I got a glass. And the mother and her 2 20-something-year-old daughters shared a glass. And they brought something out, and I'm not sure what it was. I don't think it was sour milk, but it was full of big clots. I don't think it was nasty buttermilk, or the worst possible kind. I don't know what it was to this day, but they gave me, the 3 ladies shared a half a glass together, because I could tell this is very precious, very precious. And the father got a full glass, and I got a full glass. And I tried to get mine down, and I tried to drink it as slowly. Well, I didn't have a choice, you know. And I don't know. I got the thing empty, and zoop, they filled mine up again because I was the water. No, and you go to Near East, even if you're a good vegetarian, you go to a place and you get rancid fat-tailed sheep soup. Yeah. Now, the sheep are these big fat tails. I don't know if you've ever seen them. But they've got these big fat tails, and they're just full of blubber. And then they render that stuff down, and they let it rot. And this is the delicacy. So you have a guest, you give them rancid fat-tailed sheep soup. Sometimes you just pray. I had a very, very strict friend who was a missionary, AFM missionary in New Zealand, New Guinea. And for 3 days he'd been without food. And he stumbled into a village after 3 days. And they could see he was absolutely starving to death, so they brought out a whole tray full of grubs and bugs, crawling. I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "I ate it." I said, "Were they clean, like grasshoppers?" "No, I don't know what they were. I ate it." Anyway, I don't think that the Lord strikes us dead for eating at certain times.
They have that, I think, it's the same with what they have in the Philippines.
What's that?
I think what that missionary ate
Yeah.
must have been the same with what we have it back home in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got it underneath the soil, underneath the ground, inside the ground.
Good stuff, huh?
Yeah.
Well, you can chew them if you're almost toothless. That's the good thing.
Yeah, they're soft. Yeah, they're soft. They're soft, and when you fry it, it's crispy.
Yeah, he had them raw. They were so
Yummy.
Yeah, I think it must be the same with that. It's a delicacy among farmers.
Oh, yeah. German Adventism. Was compelled soon to face problems worse than World War I. And this time it was from Adolf Hitler. But in the 1930s and the 1940s, the German church in the Third Reich would make no statement officially. That was the proper thing to do. Rather, it was left to every church member. They would make a statement of principles. It was left to every church member on how they would face the problem. And different Adventists did it differently under Adolf Hitler. And of course, you could imagine. The toleration was not very broad for dissidents, especially those who kept the Jewish Sabbath. You see, Adventists under Hitler faced a very difficult situation because the seventh-day Sabbath is Jewish. Therefore, I think we went out of our way to say he's such a nice guy, he's a vegetarian. But, you see, these are decisions. Related to lifestyle? Yeah, they're related to lifestyle. But what do you can be a vegetarian for all kinds of reasons, can't you? I've made a study of vegetarianism in history. You'd be surprised some of the strange people who turn out to be vegetarians. Well, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back and take a look at the current Seventh-day Adventist position, and then we want to move into the journey of a quotation.